conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Process Automation Community Webcast conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, please press the pound key. I would like to now turn the call over to your host, Mr. Gordon Brandyburg. You may begin your conference.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for attending the first webcast for CA Process Automation in the new year. We're going to get started this year with a webcast where we'll walk through, two presentations that we did at CA World this past year. The first will be led by James Keeler from BlueCross BlueShield of Tennessee, and he will essentially do a case study as to how they're leveraging process automation in their enterprise. And then that will be followed up by a presentation that I'll present, really walking through where we see the runbook automation, IT process orchestration technologies sort of migrating and maturing into what we're calling orchestrated solutions, and how we plan to address that as we go forward with CA Process Automation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James, and please make use of the Q&A section if you have any questions, and we'll do Q&A at the end of both sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
All you, James.
Thank you, Gordon. My name is James Keeler, as he stated, and what I'd like to do is take a few minutes this morning to discuss exactly how it is that we're using CA process automation and also the CA service catalog to help design a solution to solve one of our biggest problems, and that is request fulfillment for new machines. A little background of our company. As you can see here, we have a little over 5,000 employees and 4,200 servers. Our IS division is running right around 870 employees, and at any given time on any given day, there are typically about 55 projects in flight. Most of those projects require some sort of infrastructure item. So what that means for our department specifically is we're receiving about 120 requests for new servers each month. And at 6 hours per server, that's far too many hours per month that one employee could possibly spend to try to get those requests fulfilled. So in doing that, the employee was stacking and staggering requests on each other. And what we saw was that rather than taking a cookie-cutter approach to building our servers, we were essentially handcrafting these artisan servers where each one is unique and custom to whatever role it's going to fulfill. One of the problems with that is they are all unique and custom. So no two servers are alike or identical. This causes problems for our corporate compliance and security concerns and myriad other different problems. We also had an issue where there were so many different sources for requests to originate from. There was no central solution for tracking the requests, for tracking their approvals, for the customer to be able to determine for themselves where the process was and at what stage, or any of the little bits of information in between. All of that was a manual process where we had people who are interfacing directly with other products and GUIs and systems and databases, doing all this manual labor to try to get machines to a point where they could be released to the requester so that they could load their application. What we decided to do was what I'm sure many different companies have done. We decided we were going to automate our server request process, basically how we build our servers. Now for us, one of the things that we did was we decided to go as deep as possible with our processes. Not necessarily wide in offering lots of different options and services, but we decided to take one process right up front, and that process was the actual server provisioning. We took that one process and we went as deep as we possibly could, essentially automating every piece of that process from the time the user clicks the button for the first time to initiate the form, all the way through to the release process. And one of the ways we did that was by implementing the CA Service Catalog. The Service Catalog provides a storefront that is very, very simple and easy to use. Now, we implemented it using a shopping cart design so that our customers could show up, and if they had a project they were working on that needed 4 servers, and each of those servers was going to be fulfilling a different role, and they also needed servers for their test environment, they could request all of those machines at the same time in the same request by filling out a form for each machine and adding it to a shopping cart. They would submit that shopping cart for approval by their manager, and once approved, then that request actually comes into process automation, where the provisioning process takes over and builds the machine. Our server build process is one of the more frequently audited processes that I know of, and I personally expect to be audited at least every other year, sometimes once a year, and that's by our internal audit. Basically, they're looking at us and asking the question of, are we doing what we say we're supposed to do? Basically, that goes back to corporate compliance. Are we complying with the policy and procedure that we have drafted for ourselves? And one of the ways that process automation can help us is that it gives us a clear audit trail. We can look back at a particular process and we can show demonstratively that this particular request went through each of these operators in the process, and it either completed or it failed, and this is what happened and why it happened. Another thing that's important for us in adhering to corporate compliance is that we can enforce policy through automation, because process automation it's a computer system. It never skips a step. It never overlooks a detail. It never tries to cut corners. Specifically, for example, change management. For every server that's built, we have different integration pieces, and these require change tickets to be created. If it's a human performing these tasks, sometimes these can be overlooked. Sometimes these processes can be skirted around. With process automation, an automated system will never do that. It will always do precisely what you ask it to do. Another way we can adhere to corporate compliance is through the systems integration, because we can integrate with these existing systems rather than writing custom code. And what this does is it helps to ensure that the existing policy for these systems and the rules therein are enforced. For example, with our IP address management system. The system hands out IP addresses for certain types of servers depending on their role. And if a human goes in and they're requesting an IP address, it is very possible that they could and sometimes do request an IP address in an inappropriate range. Again, with process automation, we can solve that problem because it will only ask for what we tell it to ask. Some of the benefits to our customers and to our department are listed here as the usability and speed of fulfillment for our customers. The usability coming specifically from this shopping cart design that our customers find very familiar. And the speed of fulfillment, it no longer takes 6 hours for a server to be built. And that was a minimum 6 hours. With process automation and a fully automated process, the time it takes to build a server today can be as little as 40 minutes. So our customers have, over the past decade, gotten accustomed to getting authorization to request a server, getting their manager and director to sign off on that. Then they request a server, and they wait. They wait at least 3 days. Sometimes they wait for 4 or 5 weeks to get their server. This automated process is allowing them to go and request a server and sometimes get it the same day. Most of the time, they're going to have that server within 2 days. And the other part of that is it's very reliable. They know that if they go and they request it, they're going to get that server in at least 2 days. So we're seeing a paradigm shift here in our company where our customers, the development staff, are able to wait until the week prior to their project being kicked off and then coming to request a server rather than knowing that, oh goodness, I've got to request a server. I need to go do that now, even though my project won't kick off and I won't need the machine for 2 months. What happened in the past was because there was such a long lead time to get a server, people would request a server in January and get it in March. And once the server was released to them, they would have forgotten what they requested it for. Sometimes they would request duplicates of the same type of server because they had forgotten that they had already requested a server. This is all being eliminated. Another great aspect of this system is that it is a paperless workflow. That's a big deal for us because up until we implemented this solution using process automation and the service catalog, our customers were required to print off a form, get a wet signature in ink by their manager and by their director, sometimes a vice president as well, and then scan that and email it to me. And this day and age, people, especially in the IT industry, don't want to be walking around with a sheet of paper from person to person begging for signatures. An automated system that keeps track of approvals and allows approvals from cell phones and through email is fairly commonplace. So for us, we've been able to get a lot of glowing praise just by eliminating the paperwork for our customers. Specifically for our department, we're also seeing benefit in usability in that the manual processes that we still have can be managed through tasks. So, for example, our backup product that we have has no automation engine or accessibility whatsoever. There is no API, there are no web services, there is no command line interface. So for that product, we have to spin up a manual process to install and configure our backups. This is done through process automation tasks. The system is also extremely flexible in that it can easily integrate with our other existing systems. So rather than feeling like I am a man on an island where I own every piece of every process, and if something goes wrong, I'm by myself, I can integrate with these other existing systems that have teams of people that support them and experts in the field. That's critical. That is very critical for me especially. How we decided to roll this out was, in retrospect, quite obvious. When we stepped back and looked at what we were doing, we decided to take a phased approach, such that the first thing that we would do was fully automate our provisioning service. And in doing so, we would essentially eliminate all of the administrative overheads so that we don't have people creating change requests. We don't have people going out and getting paper signatures. We don't have people doing manual database updates. And again, in doing the automation of the provisioning service as well as the administrative overhead, that in turn simply improves the workflow. Another great part of it is, now that we have this done, we have a well-documented process. You'd be surprised how many processes you have that you think are completely understood until you actually go to automate it. And then suddenly you find out that people are doing things that they didn't realize they were doing, that things should be done that aren't being done. That was an eye-opening experience for us. So currently we are in phase 2. Specifically, I'm beginning to look at automating our hardware upgrade. I spoke to another CA customer, specifically here in the Chattanooga area, and they were giving me some ideas, and one of the things that they're looking at is something that they call VM right-sizing, where essentially they're taking the approach of looking at their VMware infrastructure to tell them how much resources a particular VM guest should have, not necessarily how much the application owner wants their server to have, but what's the recommendation from the VMware infrastructure. That to me sounds very interesting. Also in phase 2, what we'll be doing is we will begin automating the installation of certain software pieces, such as Internet Information System. We'll also be looking at doing some of the peripheral tasks, such as security scans, and doing some of the other miscellaneous tasks, such as when you have a new server come online, our Spectrum administrator has some tasks to go do, because Spectrum sees that new device out there and creates a pingable object in Spectrum. Well, he has to come back and do a few steps to turn that pingable object into a real, rich object in Spectrum. We want to try to automate those as well. For phase 3, we plan to expand the scope of our automation, and at that point, we're going to be looking at possibly automating pieces of our batch jobs in ESP. We will begin looking at allowing our customers to create their own snapshots in VMware. Now, mind you, that will be something that has quite a bit of management wrapped around it to make sure that these snapshots don't cause problems in our environment. We're also going to plan to automate our reboots so that a customer can come to us and say, by the way, I need to have this server rebooted tonight at 7 o'clock. And it would go out and create the change ticket, schedule the reboot, notify everyone that needs to be notified. And I know that there are a lot of customers out there who are looking at process automation to help automate some of their disaster recovery steps. In all, what we're seeing is the ability here with this product tied together with Service Catalog. It allows us to offer a very rich solution for our customers so that they can come and they can perform all of their lifecycle requests, whether it be provisioning the server, upgrading hardware, installing software, and also changing the server lease time and retiring servers, all within this one system. I believe now Gordon would like to talk about what the next version of PAM is going to look like and where they're headed with development. Gordon?
Yes, thanks, James. So, here we go. Okay. So when we look at sort of the evolution of what's classically called RBA technology, runbook technology, it sprung out of or from the original job scheduling, workload automation technology, and really came on board as runbook automation to focus on longer running, more interactive processes that would require human input. And then from there, as folks became familiar with the technology and its capabilities, it started to move from, or the usage of it started to move from solely runbook automation focus more towards, orchestration, so being sort of the central driver or orchestrator of various IT operational processes that one would have in your typical enterprise. And now what we're seeing in I think, CA process automation is probably at the forefront of this, is more and more folks are, taking advantage of the technology less from a RBA perspective / orchestration, just solely the orchestration component to drive, orchestrated processes, but rather using it as an orchestration to drive what we're calling solutions. So, less about just being able to run a large number of processes that don't have any relationship to one another, but more along the lines of, leveraging it as a development component that can then be, provisioned as a production engine to drive a particular use case solution. So when we look at the two different use cases, the classic RBA use cases versus the orchestrated solution use case, the classic use case for RBA started with your quote-unquote ops guy who was looking to automate, a set of runbooks or processes or standard operating procedures that were generally independent of one another. So, I might have a set that was for backups. I might have a set that was for running reports, another set of processes that dealt with, let's say, event handling. But just, there was generally independent processes that could be triggered, via a schedule or through some event-based trigger. And then you would create a library of those processes and related artifacts, along with connectors or plugins that you would use to interact with the technology in your data center, and that would essentially orchestrate that technology, as well as orchestrate or integrate with or interface with the people that were sort of responsible for those processes, operating on top of that technology. Now, when we look at our solution use case pattern, it's slightly different, but in a very distinct and important way, in that generally this is a dev person, and by dev, we don't mean someone who's on the dev team, but, rather the skill set they possess. So it's someone that could sit in your ops group, but, is your classic scripts guy or, builds custom solutions for custom apps or interfaces for, the operations personnel. But what they're used to interfacing with is an IDE that they would then be able to, output some code that would be deployed onto a server somewhere, and then that server would execute that code, and that would interface with the technology sitting in production, as well as have the ability to interface with the people. But the key thing is once that code moves into production, or it comes out of the dev guy, it's handed over generally to a separate ops person who's then responsible for essentially managing that solution in the production environment. So there's a distinct, sort of breakout between who's doing the designing of the solution and then who's actually executing it. So, if you ask, well, why are folks doing this? And it really boils down to the fact that, when you go and do an analysis of what technology you want to, implement your solution in, oftentimes having an orchestrator or orchestration as a component as part of that solution, is just a faster way to get the solution to production. It essentially reduces the design and development time and enables enables you to get to production faster. And there's some of the things that, that you would look at as part of why it's faster are, can you integrate to external systems and apps so you don't have to build those integrations yourself and find a way to manage those integrations? Can you perform remote executions or deal with firewalls? You don't have to do your own user access and management. All of that's built into the tool. And then, sort of on the flip side, in terms of capabilities that generally wouldn't be there but be requested by operations, are things like monitoring and reporting, fault tolerance capabilities, app recovery and state persistence. If, just general ops was designing an application, generally those things are, you just don't have enough funding to build that into each and every application or solution that you're doing. But because it's part of the PAM framework, you essentially get that for free if you choose to leverage, CA process automation as an orchestration component within your solution. So what does that mean for PAM and as we look to go forward? So what we're doing is we're maintaining the existing PAM orchestrator and all of its capabilities. And for the RBA usage pattern, we will continue to support. The current PAM UI will still be the default UI for implementing those types of use cases. But as we look forward, we're going to implement something that we're calling a solution studio that will be an available component that will sit on top of the PAM orchestrator. It'll communicate to the PAM orchestrator through a new API, a new REST-based API that doesn't require Catalyst. And there will be a solution server that will provide really 3 distinct user experiences. One for the designer, which will be the solution studio. One for the administrator, the person that's responsible for getting a solution and then deploying it into production and sort of managing it and administrating it. That will be the solution administrator user experience. And then someone who's just a pure consumer of that solution. And we will have a distinct user experience UI for that user as well. So why are we doing this? Well, what we've seen is, obviously we see more and more customers leveraging the technology to address these sort of higher level use cases that really function more as an application or a solution than individual processes. But that paradigm isn't currently directly supported in the PAM Orchestrator UI. And so the solution suite will go to address that paradigm shift that we're seeing. So we will have a user experience aligned with the use cases that particular user is leveraging. So to start, we will have what we call activities that are part of a solution. So you'll be able to go in and define a set of activities that a solution provides. And that activity is essentially an association of a trigger. How do I want a process or a set of processes to execute, along with what process that I want to execute. Today we don't really have a direct, easy way to map that. You can define triggers, you can set up schedules, but they're all located in different areas, and then how you assign the process that starts is different for each one of those mechanisms. Here, there will be a consistent implementation of how you define the trigger and how you define what process it will call, and that will be an activity, and you'll essentially have a library of activities that are associated with your solution. Another thing that we will have is our data sets, and the idea here is instead of you having a main data set concept that you can use and share information, now at a solution level you can directly define a data set that will be immediately available to all the essentially processes or activities that are associated within that particular solution. We'll also have user interfaces that can be directly associated with that solution. So in addition to just having the ability to create forms and then use those forms wherever you want, the idea here is you can create forms and interaction request forms, but then you can specify what you actually want to see in a user interaction itself or user interface itself. So there might be forms that aren't really public that can be filled out or used, by a process or an activity. But when I go in and I'm a consumer and I want to see what, things I can do with this particular solution, I can have a distinctly specified set of, for lack of a better term, activities or services that are available that I can interface with through the user interfaces. Shared subroutines, we've actually changed that name now as we've developed it, so I'll have to update the slide. But the idea here is we've previously had several requests for the ability to share bits of code across different processes, sort of like a JavaScript library. You will now be able to do that through something called a JavaScript library. Also, if there are processes that you want to call from other processes, we will be able to leverage those by having something called an API activity. So you can have an activity that's triggered by a schedule. You can have an activity that's triggered by an event. You can also have an activity that's triggered by an API call. And the real value here is you can specify that as being a public or private API. Private APIs would essentially be just like calling a sub-process in today's PAM. But a public API would actually be essentially a quick and easy way to publicize a new process that you want to be accessible to be called via a REST-based web service call through the API. When we look at the solution administrator, one of the things that we really wanted to do is we really wanted to break apart the user experience for the designer and the administrator. And the reason being, today in PAM, they're very much intertwined, and that causes some distinct problems. One, it makes the sort of the learning curve steeper, because there's things, if I'm a designer, that I might see that are not really relevant to me because they're only relevant when I'm an administrator, and vice versa, as well as because of the way it's designed, there's certain features that we are supporting in production that probably really shouldn't be available in a production environment that actually impact the performance at which we can execute processes. So we really wanted to separate and make a distinct UI for administrators. And the concept here is, when I get a solution from a solution designer, I can install that into my solution server, and I will have one or more of these tabs that will allow me to configure that solution in my environment, starting with configuration properties. So if there are values that need to be defined at a solution level, now I have a very easy and consistent way to say these are the variables that or configuration properties that need to be set when you want to use this solution. Another thing, dependencies, which is really focused right now on if there are connectors that this solution requires, what are those connectors, what versions of them, and also are they installed on the solution server. That information will be available within the dependencies tab on the administration console. Also, the ability to find who has access to the various user interfaces on a group EDM-based policy basis. Touch point mappings. One of the challenges we've always had is if I leverage specific touch points in designing my processes and I export and import that out into a different environment, those specific touch point names need to exist in that environment in order for my content to work. Now we have a place where you can define what those touch point names are, and then you can go in as the administrator and map the touch points to those names via the touch point mappings area. And also, we have now a consistent log that can be associated with the solution. So today, if I sort of create a solution within PAM and I can package it up, there's really no single place that I can look to see for this instance of this solution, what's the log file. I'd have to either use a name data set or look in various process instances and try and pull that together. Now, the system itself will log key solution level messages, system messages to a common log, as well as the solution designer has access to a common solution log for that solution instance. And then for the end user experience, it's really bared back so that essentially they can just get what they need. So if there's a particular solution or activity they need to interact with, they can drill into that and select one or more of the available activities based on their rights. They have access to input forms and respond to requests, or basic task management. And less task management, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that term actually. We really want to distinguish between task management, which we support in PAM, versus this is really more, requests for information from a given activity or process. So if I need input for something from a human, we will support that and allow users to specify that, as well as, the classic start request forms. And then the thing that we will have a limited support for, I think, in this release, but we will expand upon significantly in future releases, is the concept of data views. So being able to have real-time information published back to the end user about what's going on in the process, and being able to view data that's associated with that process that's really relevant to the end user. So in summary, the fastest growing use case we see for RBA today is really the orchestrated solution scenario. And the model of the design, test, deployment, and administration of these solutions really requires a different paradigm from the classic sort of single super user RBA solution that the technology was originally targeted for, and that's really where we are looking to take the technology as we go forward to better align with that use case. And with that, I think that's we're going to open it up for questions.
If you'd like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask an audio question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And there are no audio questions at this time.
I don't see it on the WebEx either. So if there are no other questions, I think Mary's already put the poll. If you could take a few seconds and fill out the poll questionnaire, we really appreciate it. And thanks for your time and attendance today, and everyone have a good day.
Gordon?
Mm-hmm.
We have one question in the Q&A.
Okay.
If you'd like to ask an audio question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad.
I think we have a question. What is the timeline for the changes discussed? Just a few things on that. I really want to be clear, just in case there's any confusion. What we're talking about is less a change and more of an addition. So all of the existing functionality we support in PAM today will continue to be supported. We're just adding a new component that will help target, a usage pattern that we're seeing. The original plan was delivery sometime in the first quarter of this calendar year. However, we are currently in the middle of developing this release, and we're looking at making some changes to the scope, and so that might change as we look forward. And if it does, we will update the roadmap accordingly with how we want to reflect when certain parts of this functionality will be available. And yes, can we get the recording of this WebEx? Certainly, I think Mary always posts a link to the WebEx not too long after within the community itself. Any other questions?
And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask an audio question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And there are no audio questions at this time.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, James, for presenting today.
Certainly.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect. Presenters, one moment.